Hello, everybody. Can you believe we are on clue number 3? This is our third week doing the mystery quilt. Hello, everybody. It's so great that you're hanging out with me. Clue number 3. Y'all, we're doing applique again this week. And let me just tell you, if you're intimidated by applique and the nature of a mystery quilt, let me just rest your mind, okay? This clue, these pieces, this is the hardest applique we are doing for the entire quilt. There will be more applique down the road, but there'll be bigger pieces. These are the smallest applique pieces we are doing for this entire quilt. They are a little bit small. I'm doing mine with raw edge applique, and so I'm going to walk you through doing that portion today. Hi, everybody. I'm so glad that y'all are enjoying this quilt. It's a lot of fun, right? And let me just say that the 4 pieces that we're working on this week will go in the center of this quilt. So it's starting to take shape, right? Hi, everybody. You love my shirt, right? Bob Ross. Timeless, classic, one of my heroes. All right, everybody. Yeah, welcome. So what I've done is I've already completed 3 of my pieces for this week. And I learned a couple of things that might be helpful for you, whether you're doing it raw edge applique or turned edge applique. The things that I learned, I'm going to pass along to you. You might find them helpful. And we're going to make one of these sections together. Mavis, you ordered your fabrics. Yay! Yay, that's exciting. Okay, so let's go to the cutting mat. Let's take a look at clue number 3, right? The English rose. If you are computer savvy, you could probably find out what an English rose block looks like on the internet, right? And get some ideas of what the center of this quilt is going to look like. So for this quilt, we're starting by pulling, remember clue number 1? At the very bottom, there was a yellow box that says cut 4 8.5 by 8.5 pieces of fabric from your A fabric. Pull those out from clue number 1, right? There you go. We have 4 of them. I've already done 3. So here's my finished ones, right? Isn't that pretty? Yes, I did all 3 of these yesterday. So we're going to go and walk through the steps of doing one together. So there's some information, right? I'm not going to go through all the different ways like we did last week on how to do the applique. Like if you're just joining or you want to see other methods of applique for this particular clue, go back to video number 2. I walked through 4 methods, but there's more, right? So yeah, that goes more into detail. I'm going to show the raw edge applique using Heat and Bond Light for my pieces, okay? Karen said, can you mix turned and raw edge applique in the same quilt? Well, okay, so if you were to put this quilt in a show one day, I don't know if that would take off points if a jury is judging your quilts, right? If you have a mixture of raw edge and turned edge, it might. But if you're making this quilt for you or to give away to someone, I don't see why you couldn't mix them up, right? Just know if you were to put this in a juried show, I imagine that might be cause to lose some points. I don't know. I've never put a quilt into a juried show like that. So just keep that in mind. Susan, there was no SVG cutting file for clue number 1 because we cut those pieces and it was like patchwork. The only time I'm going to offer an SVG is if we're doing applique pieces, which there is an SVG. The link is in the description box for these pieces. Okay, let me show you what that looks like, okay? Because if you're wondering, let me mix up the screens for a minute. Let me go down here because I did take a picture of it. So I have a Brother Scan and Cut. Oh, that's going to take forever to open. Not responding. Hold on a second, y'all. I think there's too much for my computer to handle. I have a brother scan and cut, so I use Canvas Workspace to open my SVGs, and then I move things around, you know, right here, and then send it to my cutting machine, right? But here are all the pieces laid out on my mat, and I sent all of the pieces and cut them all out at one time from a 12-inch by 12-inch piece of fabric, right? And it only took 3 minutes to cut out all these pieces. Now, if you're using a Cricut, your design space is going to look different than this, right? But the concept is the same. What other photo did I save? I took a couple photos. Here you go. So this is what it actually looked like after I was done. I was able to lift the extra fabric up, and all of these pieces were cut. So, yeah, pretty awesome, right? But let's go back here. Cutting mat. There we go. But, so I know a majority of people don't have a cutting machine, right? What I did this week is I gave you a printing page with all of your pieces. This is all the pieces. If you want to print this right out on freezer paper or Heat and Bond Light, right? These are your raw edge templates, and it just takes one page, print them out, and yeah, you're ready to fuse it to fabric and start cutting. If you're doing turned edge applique, I gave you 2 pages of templates, right? You could print these out and do turned edge applique. And then the last page is what we're going to use to perfectly line up all of our pieces, right? So we're not going to go into printing the pages like we did last week and all the different methods. We're just going to start right here. And for this clue, we're using the A fabric that we cut in clue number 1. And I designated C fabric for this portion of applique. I know a lot of you are choosing different colors for your mystery quilt. If your C color is not a green color, I still think it would be fabulous, right? So consider using whichever fabric you've chosen for C, even if it's not green. Okay. Just want to make sure I'm not missing anything. All right, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to bring you through and walk you through how I marked the correct placement. Are you using Canvas Workspace instead of Inkscape? I designed the patterns in Inkscape, but when I'm working with them to cut them out, I import them into Canvas Workspace and then send them to my cutter that way. There's no function in Inkscape to send an SVG from Inkscape to your cutting machine. All right, so the instructions for lining up these pieces is really simple, y'all. There is these 2 lines that kind of form an L, right? We're going to use the lines to line up our applique pieces. So we're going to take our 8.5 by 8.5 inch square and line them up right on those 2 lines, and that's going to give us the same exact placement for all the pieces on all 4 blocks. Now you might find if you have a light pad or a window that that's going to be really helpful for you. I am going to use whichever one shows up the better, a friction marking pen to mark where these applique pieces are going to go. And I'm going to turn this light pad on, but it might drown out the camera. I'm not sure. I hope it doesn't, but I did not mark this particular block. Why are you not turning on? Are you plugged in? Hold on a second, y'all. Oh, darn do? Oh, it wasn't plugged in all the way. There we go. Okay, let's try it again. There we go. I was like, oh no, my handy dandy trusty notepad is not working. Okay, so again, we're just going to line these right up on the line. You're going to do this for each 4 of the pieces, right? And then you can just see right through that fabric, and we're just going to trace an outline of each one of the pieces. That's going to make sure that they're all exactly perfect. And just to save time, I'm just giving myself, you could trace the whole piece, and that's what I did on the other 3. But to save time, I'm just giving myself some reference marks for this one, like the bottom of that stem. I'll mark the top of the stem. I'll mark these little stems. There goes my bird. And this leaf is going to go right there. And that leaf is going to go right there. And then we have this leaf down here. So I want you to pay real close attention because the leaves look very similar. But these 2 top leaves are a little bit bigger than the 2 leaves at the bottom. So just pay attention to that. I think that's a reference for all of these pieces. Now keep in mind that these 2 stems right here, they do tuck underneath of that long straight stem, okay? And we're just going to turn that off and move her out of the way. So I think it's going to be a little bit hard for you to see, but I did make some reference points. And I'm going to get my iron heating up. And we're going to fuse these pieces into place. Let's scoot this over. Sheila said, one of these days I'm going to get a light pad. I'm going to tell you what, it's the best $20 I've spent in a long time. Well, I've had it for a while now. I've had it for a few years, but I love my light pad. It was like $20. It was 19 something, right? Can you see? You could just see it on the screen. See those little marks? That's what I'm going to use. You could, of course, trace the whole thing if that makes it easier for you. And what I have are my remaining little pieces, right? So let's see. The bottom of the stem. See that little mark right there? So let's just put that in place. And I kind of pressed mine in sections because you have a lot of little pieces that might move out of the way while you're pressing, right? So the way I lined mine up is I lined up that straight stem in the middle first, and it's just sitting there. And then I got the 2 small leaves. So 2 are smaller and 2 are bigger. And I'm going to start by just placing these down first. And my pieces have Heat and Bond Light on the back of them. And I'm going to press this, but I'm not going to press the whole stem yet, right? I'm just going to go to about right there with the iron so that I can lift up the stem and place those 2 smaller stems. Let me stand up to make sure. Oh, she's not heating up. Hold on a second. Now we have to wait a second. I always have so much fun coming back and reading the chat later on because I miss so much, y'all. All right, let's see if that's heated up now. Yeah, she's swarm. All right, so I'm just going to press that for a second, right? But I'm not going up too far. That'll keep those leaves and the bottom of the stem from moving around. We just anchored it right in place. And then we have two little short curved stems, right? When you cut them out, 4 are curving this way and 4 are curving that way. So for each one of your blocks, you're going to use 2 curved stems, but one's going to curve that way and one's going to curve that way. So now we can lift up the rest of that stem and place these pieces. So one goes there and one goes underneath. Ooh, my fingers are shaky today. And then the stem goes right back over top. See that? And I'm going to press those so they don't move. Let's back one down. There we go. All right, let's not move those. Let's press those. Which scan and cut is the best for fabric? Okay, so I have the CM350, right? It's an older model. It's been discontinued. It cuts fabric like nobody's business. I love it. I know with the Cricut, I hear a lot of people talk about the Cricut in the Zooms we do, in chatter on Facebook, in different forums. Evidently, and I don't have experience with Cricuts, but evidently some of the Cricut models cut fabric better than others, right? I don't know that Scan and Cut has any models that would not cut out fabric the same way the CM350 does. I don't know. I would love to hear some feedback on that. What we have left is 2 of the bigger leaves. What I would do, what I always suggest doing, is if you're in the market for any machine, I don't care if it's a Scan and Cut or a Cricut, Silhouette, any of them. Whatever model you're looking at, go watch whatever review videos you can find on it. Watch them and see, what other people have to say for using the machine the way you want to use it, right? Okay. I'm going to finish fusing those pieces right in place. So that little guide is just going to give us the same placement so we don't have to guess, and each one of the 4 blocks are going to look exactly the same. And just make sure they're fused right in place. So, let me just bring these back. See, everything looks exactly the same, right? So let me talk about some of the things that I noticed stitching down these little tiny pieces, right? The leaves aren't that tiny, but the 2 stems, the curved ones, and that straight one, they're pretty thin, right? They're pretty thin. So let me just tell you a couple of things that you might find helpful, because what could happen when you're stitching down this applique is if you are using a denser stitch, we've cut these blocks out exactly the size that they need to be pieced into our quilt, right? And if we are using a dense stitch to stitch down this applique, there is the possibility that the edges of our block, or the block size in general, is going to shrink up a little bit to accommodate for the stitching of all this applique. Hold on a second, y'all. I've got lots of questions. If we are doing turned applique, would you recommend glue basting to the square? Yes. What is the length and measurement of the straight stem? Hold on a second, I'll tell you. Let me find a ruler. Oh. I want to stop and answer those two questions because I will likely forget to come back to them. The stem is 7 7/8 long. You could go ahead and make it 6. Oh, sorry. I was using the wrong side of the ruler. 5 7/8 long. I would just go ahead and make it 6 inches long, right? It's obvious something's going to go over top of that down the road. And then it is really thin. So it is not quite a 1/4 inch wide. It's between the 1/8 and 2/8, right? If you cut it out at a 1/4 inch wide, it's going to be a little bit wider than what we've used. Darlene said, can we make the stem a different fabric from the leaves? Absolutely, it's your quilt. Yes, have fun, get creative with it. All right, so we don't want these blocks to shrink up, it basically is what I'm saying, right? Because we've pre-cut them to the size they need to be sewn into our quilt. So let me just say, if you did not start your A fabric before you cut these pieces, you could starch this fabric before you start applying your pieces. But if you do that, be very, very careful. I don't know if you can see this one block right here. See that? Well, here you go. I think you'll see it better if I turn it around. I starched this one. And do you see how it shrunk up a little bit? Because I put wet starch on it and then I used a hot iron and it shrunk up this piece quite a bit. See that? So I'm going to have to be very mindful of this one piece when I go to start sewing this quilt together because it is smaller. Okay, so if you are starching now and using a hot iron on wet fabric, there's the possibility that your blocks are going to draw up a little bit. So just be really careful and mindful of that. I did find that even though I'm doing a blanket stitch today, and you might have noticed that when I flip this around, even though I'm doing a blanket stitch, because these stitches are so close together, I used a stabilizer underneath of my work. And what that's going to do is help support this background fabric with the needle punching into it so close together. And that's going to prevent your block from shrinking up so much. Hazel said for a minute, I thought you had pruned. We just haven't gotten to the rest of the block yet, Hazel. Peggy said, can you cut them a little bigger and then square them up after all the sewing? Yes, you could do that, Peggy. You could absolutely do that. All right, so let's talk about some stabilizers. Oftentimes you'll hear me say that I use coffee filters. If you take a coffee filter and you just iron it nice and flat, that makes a great tearaway stabilizer. Of course, there's all kinds of tearaway stabilizers on the market that you could buy. I have a bunch of these, and I found them while I was packing, and I forgot I had them. Phone book pages, right? I'm going to rip out 2 of these. I'm going to use 2 phone book pages. These tear really easily, even with a blanket stitch. I'm going to put, there's 2 pages of phone book paper right underneath of my applique. And that's going to help stabilize the background fabric as I do the applique on this. And then we'll just tear it off when we're done. If your thread allows you for this particular clue, you might want to go to a small needle. Well, it just so happens that that's all I have left at the moment. But if your thread and your fabric allows you, without causing any thread jams and needle thread breaks and stuff like that, you might want to switch down to like a 70-10 needle. The smaller needle is going to create less pressure when puncturing your background fabric. And in my opinion, I think it will help reduce any shrinking of this block and reduce any tucks and puckering you might get. So try using a smaller needle if you have them. And if your thread works good with it, right? You might also want to lower your top tension just a bit. Okay, not enough to cause issues with your stitches, but just enough to relieve some of the pressure in those stitches. So today I'm going to be using a blanket stitch, and I've lowered the dial on the top of my machine to a -1. So that might be helpful for you if you're having issues with your background drawing up. On a test piece, see if you can reduce the tension just a little bit. I'm trying to think of anything else. And one thought that I had, and I know everyone, most people have already purchased their fabrics and all that stuff. But while I was stitching these, I was like, you know what would be awesome? Doing these pieces with wool, right? Cutting these pieces out of wool and just doing a quick little whip stitch around the pieces. That would be lovely. Just throwing some ideas out there. Okay. Do you think creating the stem with a 1/4" bias tape maker would be okay? I have not used I have a 1/4" bias tape maker, Donna, but I haven't ever made any that is that size. So, what you could do is just make a little bit and then place it right here on your paper and see if it looks like it's a good size, right? In the finished quilt, no one's going to walk up to your quilt and say, oh, your stems are wider than what the pattern says. So if that's easier for you to do it that way, and it doesn't really look inappropriate, I don't think it would look inappropriate to have that stem a little wider, then by all means, if that's helpful for you, that's what I would do. Okay, so yeah, my blanket stitch. Let me go ahead and set that up. I'm using a really, really tiny blanket stitch, and let me just see if this will focus so much. Here's one of my pieces. See how little small that blanket stitch is? She's tiny. You might even see it better on the back. See that? It's a tiny blanket stitch. Pardon me. The settings I'm going to set my machine for my blanket stitch, and you can use whatever stitch you want. I'm using a blanket stitch on these pieces, and let me just tell you why. Because that stem is so thin, I thought even with a small zigzag stitch that it would pretty much cover that entire stem, right? So I went with a blanket stitch. The width of my blanket stitch is going to be a 1.4, and the length of my blanket stitch is going to be a 1.8. So let me just get that set up. 1.4, 1.8. And like I mentioned, I did dial down the tension of my top thread to a -1. If you're experiencing some problems, try that. I will be removing the paper. Not from the leaves. I think I'm going to leave that in there because you don't really see it, right? And it's not going to hurt anything. And if you ever wash the quilt, these will eventually fall apart. And I'll probably leave the paper in the leaves and the stem areas. But the rest of the paper I'll take off. All right. We're going to move over to the sewing machine. I'm going to stitch these pieces with you so you see what it looks like. And again, just keep in mind, this is the hardest part of applique for this entire quilt. Okay, once you get past this, it's a breeze. And I do think, like, if you followed along in all the things, the free version where we did applique on charm squares, if you did that applique, this is going to be a breeze for you. Hazel said you could do a bit of couching on the leaves. You could. You could, Hazel. She's getting all creative. All right, I'm going to miss a lot of the chat. I'm going to switch over to the sewing machine. And here we are. Hold on a second, y'all. All right. I have that same Coates and Clark thread that I used last week in the bobbin and in the top thread. I don't love it, but I'm committed now. I'm committed, so we're using it. All right. I found it easy. I'm going to go ahead and stitch the two smaller leaves first, right? And I don't like to start at the tips of anything. I find starting at a side much easier, and that's just for me. That paper is just going to help support that top fabric right there. My blanket stitch, that needle's just running right along the edge of that fabric. And it is just wide enough to go in and take a stitch in that applique, just a tiny little stitch, but it'll be enough to hold it in place. You could even use a wider blanket stitch in the leaves and then make it smaller for the stems if you wanted to. Right at that tip, I like to take one stitch into the leaf and then come back the other side. You probably don't even see those stitches because as much as I don't like this thread, it really does blend in with that fabric pretty nicely. All right, we're going to do one stitch right at this corner and start coming down the other side. So that's the first leaf stitched out. See that? I will say, if you are still stitching down clue number 2 and you're having issues with the little corners, your background fabric puckering in the corners, maybe try using some coffee filters or some kind of stabilizer to help support that background fabric. That might be helpful for you. All right, I'm going to switch over to this other leaf. That first stitch, I like it to go nice and slow. Now I'm right at that tip. I'm just going to turn it, take a stitch into that leaf, and come back down the other side. I want to thank my moderators for being here today, y'all. Thank y'all so much. I can't keep an eye on the chat while I'm over here. I'm right at the tip. I'm going to take a stitch and then come back down the other side. All right. Now we have the bottom two leaves done. The next thing I did were the two side stems, right? So I'm going to stitch out this first stem, and I'm going to start right here next to that middle stem. I'm going to stitch all the way around, and I'm going to stop right when I get to that middle stem. Anytime I'm rotating that fabric, I'm making sure that the needle is in the background, in the right position, right? And not in the applique. Short little turns right around the edge of that stem right there. You'll also, as you start this clue, if you haven't changed your needle in a while, because we're working with smaller pieces and we want the needle to go through that background fabric nice and cleanly, right? That'll reduce a lot of the puckering and the shrinking of this piece. A brand new needle would be helpful too. And I'm one to talk because I don't change my needles that often, but I did for this particular clue. All right, so we have that first curved stem stitched out, right? We're going to start this other stem, and I'm going to start right here next to the edge of that long stem. So we're going to stitch around, and then when we get to that middle stem, I'm not going to break the thread. I'm just going to turn everything, and while we're right there, I'm going to just go ahead and stitch that long middle stem. Sort of like all one section, right? And just make sure everything's still running good. I will say, if you're one who's using freezer paper to do your applique, I know you love the softness of the applique and the quilt, right? There is an advantage, especially in this particular clue anyway, of using heat and bond to do your raw edge applique over the freezer paper. And in my opinion, I feel like the heat and bond adds a layer of stabilizer to the applique fabric, which also reduces a lot of the shrinking of the background fabric, in my opinion. And I just like to say those things because I read everything on Creative Crew. I might not comment on everything, but I see when people are struggling. I feel like when I say these things, it might give you ideas if you're struggling with something to try doing it a different way. All right, I'm coming right to the edge of that stem. I know it's hard to see, but there I am, right on the edge of that stem. I'm just going to swing everything right around, and we're going to come down the right side and work our way back up. I would go faster, but this thread does not like going faster. All right, right at the corner. Even though the very top of this stem is going to get covered over with something else. I mean, that's obvious. That's not a mystery. I'm still stitching that down. I don't think it's going to hurt anything to have those stitches in that. And we're coming back down the other side. See how I slow down coming to that edge? All right, we're going to come, and I'm going to pass where I started just a little bit. All right, so at this point, all we have left to do are the two bigger leaves, right? These will be the easiest parts of today's clue. If your machine does not have a thread cutter, mine has a thread cutter. It makes an awful mess on the back, but I'm still using it. But if your machine doesn't have a thread cutter, you might want to take that starting thread and pull it back to the back, right? With a needle, just thread it, pull it back to the back. And when you're done, any top thread that's left over, pull it to the back and tie yourself a little knot so that that blanket stitch, if that's what you're using, or a zigzag stitch, does not come undone. All right, we have one more leaf to stitch. So even though I've stopped and you know, talked a little bit, I know this seems like a lot of pieces to stitch down, but I think it does go pretty quickly, especially after you get through the first one, right? You get through the first one and your nervousness goes away, and then the other three are much easier, and I think will go by faster. I did see someone is hand sewing their pieces. They're doing turned edge applique, or at least with clue number 2, they did turned edge applique and they hand stitched all of their pieces in place. I was a little bit jealous. Okay, y'all. So there are all of our pieces. I think you might see the stitches better, even though the lighting isn't great. I think the stitches show up better over here than they do over here. Tammy, this will end up being an English rose. All right, so let's come back over here. I will say, if you decide to use a tearaway stabilizer like this, you might want to hold off on pulling that paper off, right? Because it does add some stabilization while you're appliquing. And, I mean, it's pretty obvious, right? We're going to have something going here and something going here. So you might want to leave that paper on until those sections are done, right? You might also want to just tear it off like I'm going to do and use new papers. Okay, so for me, see how easy that phone book paper just tears away? I just start tearing, y'all. Coffee filters will also tear away this easily. I just sort of hold my finger on those stitches just supporting them just a little bit, right? And just tear off the paper. I've used a small enough blanket stitch that it does sort of cut the paper as it goes along, right? Sometimes if you do a larger blanket stitch, it's not quite enough to really cut that paper too well, but I've used a tiny one, so it does come off pretty easily. The good news is we only have 4 blocks to do this on. And again, you might want to leave that paper on until everything is stitched on these pieces, and then you only have to do this one time, right? I'm just using my handy dandy Dollar Tree stylus and just cutting that paper. See that? Because there are some sections in between that stem and those leaves that don't want to come out quite as easy. This little Dollar Tree stylus is fantastic. I use this point to score my packing boxes, and that point has it's kind of sharp like a needle. Not that sharp, but it has a pointy end. It's great for stuff like this. And for weeding vinyl. It's great for that too. So I just go right on in here, score that paper, and pull it right on out. And I personally, I'm going to leave the paper inside the leaves. You're not going to see it. And this paper is so lightweight that it's not really adding any weight or stiffness to this block. And if I ever wash this quilt, that paper is just going to get softer and softer as we go along. But look, it's still really, really soft with that leaf, with that paper still in there. So then you have this big old mess. Let me clear this out. You might want to do that part with a trash can handy. There we go. But I want you to just look at that. See how everything is laying nice and flat and smooth? Very, very flat and smooth. So just the difference of that paper being in there while you're stitching makes a huge difference, right? And we don't have to worry about that block shrinking up while we're stitching. So there we go. Let's just take a little peek at what this might look like. Let's see. Terry is asking if we can use a light stabilizer and the freezer paper together. That would probably work. Just, I think if you put a stabilizer on this fabric, is that what you're asking? Like a Pellon or something? Just know that this part, okay. I think what you're asking is if you could put like a Pellon on the back of this fabric. That would definitely help a lot. Just know that your other fabrics, you're not going to do that to, right? So there might be a difference in the feeling of this being stabilized and the rest of the parts of the quilt not. I don't know in the big scheme of things if that's going to make a difference or not, especially if you use a lightweight like Pellon P44F. That is super lightweight. There's a lot of other ones too. If you use a thicker one, it's going to make the middle portion of your quilt a little bit stiffer than the rest of the quilt. Okay, so let's just do a little arranging. Like so. Like so. I don't know that it's all going to fit in the camera's view. But if we arranged our blocks like that, whoops, this is going to give you a preview of the center of the quilt, right? We're certainly not done. And there's more parts to come out later, but isn't that going to be pretty? Isn't that so pretty? Oh, so just the applique fabric itself. I've never done that, Terry. It might help a lot. You know what I would do? I would just do 1 or 2 little leaves and just do it on a small piece to see if it's helpful for you, see if it makes any difference before doing all your pieces like that, right? It might help a lot. I've never done it that way, so I can't say for certain. Cheryl said, I would put sashing in between the pieces. You could, Cheryl. If you're joining it as a quilt as you go, but just know, if you're going to start sewing stuff together, you might mess up your measurements, so you'd better hold off on doing anything yet. And it might affect, if you put a sashing that's a different color, it might affect the way that that piece is supposed to look. I do think, so I know a lot of people asked if joining this together as a quilt as you go is an option. If you're doing it that way, personally, if you're using sashing strips to join your blocks, I personally would make my sashing pieces out of the same fabric you're using for A, so that it blends in. That's just me. You might want to wait and see what it's supposed to look like and then decide. Christine said, when using phone book pages, wouldn't the ink rub off onto the fabric? It might. I know newsprint. Newspapers, I don't know about here lately. I haven't gotten a newspaper in a long time, but it used to be that, you know, after reading the paper and messing with the paper, you'd have some ink on your hands, right? I have never ever had a problem so far with phone book pages doing that. I don't know if they're printed differently. And I also don't know that, like, my phone books are old. Let's see, when did this one come out? 2017, 2018 phone book. So, and this is the newest one. The other ones that I have, my Nana saved for me, right? That's back in the day when they had the thick, I have 3 really big, thick phone books, the full-size ones with the white pages and the yellow pages. And those are old. They're like vintage. But I don't know if it's because, you know, maybe they print with different ink. Maybe they set it differently, it dries differently. But I've never noticed the ink to transfer with phone book pages. That's just me. But if that makes you really nervous, then by all means, try using coffee filters, right? Or purchase a tearaway stabilizer. This doesn't make me nervous, but that's just me. Connie said, do they still put out phone books? I haven't seen the old big thick phone books in a long time. This, I haven't even gotten a phone book like this. This was just the yellow pages, right? Since 2017. But ask around in your family. They might be holding on to some phone books. Heather said, is a Zoom planned for tonight? Sadly, I did not plan a Zoom for tonight. Could you use old paper or a lot of tissue papers will work, yes. A lot of tissue papers will work. Let's go back to this camera. I did not plan a Zoom for tonight because they're coming on the 14th to take pictures of the house, right? So we have until the 14th to finish packing and clearing a lot of stuff out. So we have strategically each evening, we work during the day. Each evening we've strategically planned out all the stuff we have left to do before they come take pictures. So tonight I'm going to be packing up clothes and some stuff in my closet. I would much rather be doing a Zoom than doing that. I can tell you that. But I know others have hosted Zooms. Vicky oftentimes will host Zooms on our page. So I don't know what anybody else's plans are. Unfortunately, I can't host a Zoom tonight because I have to pack my closet. So here's an update. Yes, dryer sheets also work. The size of my needle today, well, pretty much throughout this whole quilt because that's all I have left. I could buy some more. I'm using a Smith's Universal needle, and I found, and here's the thing, if I was using a bigger needle for the rest, I would have switched down to this needle for this particular clue. 7010. It's the smallest needle in one of these multi-packs. Oh, Vicky says she'll do a Zoom tonight. If I get finished packing and y'all are still on, then I'll hop on. We have a good majority of the stuff in our closet is packed. I have some extra clothes I have to pack up. I only own 3 pairs of shoes, so that's not a big deal. But I have some other stuff, like some picture frames I've been storing in there and stuff. That stuff has to be packed up. But if I get done and y'all are still Zooming, then I'll come in. We're not sure when we're moving yet. So here's some sad news, but it is what it is. Like if you've been following along each week, then you know from last week we put an offer on a house that we really, really liked. Like everything about that was perfect for our needs. The whole situation, it was perfect. But we went and had a home inspection done Saturday. Actually, we did not. Yep, our pod is full. They're picking it up tomorrow. We're getting another pod. We didn't even get through the whole entire home inspection because the home inspector walked around the main house and pulled us over to the side and said, look, I can keep on going and charge you the full amount of the home inspection, but let me just tell you what I found so far, and then you decide what you want to do. So he told us about all of the moisture issues that he can see. You know, a home inspector, they can't like drill a hole in the wall and look inside the walls, but they can observe like the outside. He didn't even make it inside the house yet. And he's like, I think you have a lot of moisture issues here to deal with. And so sadly, we have withdrawn our offer on that house. It's sad, but I think that house would be a nightmare financially for us. You know, if we had a big renovation budget for something like that, then we would continue on, but no, that's kind of scary. So we're on the search again, but we're still packing, we're still listing our house. And the search continues for the perfect setup without moisture issues within walls that we can't see. Yeah, like Heather said, it wasn't the house for us, evidently. You know, and that's why you have home inspections, right? Yes. Miss Vicky, exactly. Thank God for the home inspections. Yes, they're worth every bit you pay for. And you know what? I really believe this guy too, because let me just tell you, the home inspection was going to be $945. And he stopped and he said, look, this is what I found just so far, and I've only just done the outside of this house. There's still another house. There's still a garage, right? Let me just tell you what I found, and then I'm going to go get a cup of coffee. And y'all sit here and talk, discuss if you want me to continue. If you want me to stop here, I'm only going to charge you this and not the full amount. And I really feel like that shows a lot of integrity, because he could have just continued with the rest of the inspection to make the $945 and not said anything until the end, right? So I really trust what he had to say, and I'm thankful for it. We do. We have a realtor we've worked with for a long time. She's really good. Yep, Mary Jo said, God has something better for you. And that's what we're believing too. Linda, you're here. The first live you've made. Yay. Yeah. I really like, he's the one I want to do my next home inspection because that just shows a lot of integrity, right? It really does. So yeah. But to make up for it, I did have something really fun happen this week. I got to meet with Betty and Jane, and we had coffee and cookies, and we just talked for an afternoon. And I'm going to tell you, if you're super busy like I am, or if you just have a lot on your plate, right? Physically, mentally, emotionally, it's really good to take a step away from it and just have an afternoon where you're not dealing with any of that. That was like the best medicine after that news Saturday, right? We had coffee, we ate cookies, we had lots of laughs. It was, if you can just step away like one afternoon from everything you're going, or evening or more, whenever, but just stepping away from everything just helps you when you come back and you get back into it, right? Daria said, you'll have to make him a quilt. I might have to. Anitra said, this is my step away, Lisa. I'm so glad. I'm so glad. Dee said, I would love to take a break. Dee, you are so busy all the time. You want to talk about busy? You stay nonstop. Unfortunately, the first house we really, really liked is under contract. But the good news is, right? I mean, one of the reasons why we're listing the house in the spring is because that's when houses start popping up, right? Because in our area, we have high military traffic moving. So we feel very hopeful that another situation will pop up that works. We're kind of needy buyers. We have a lot of things that we're looking for that not every house suits those needs, right? Like another kitchen, a studio with a separate entrance, you know. So yeah, we're kind of needy. Well, I certainly appreciate y'all hanging out with me, and I'm glad that this is your time to step away from everything else and that you're picking it to hang out with me and everybody else. I feel really special about that. I do. But yeah, we're just going to continue packing. We're going to keep the same game plan. Our house will list, well, they're taking photos on the 14th. And then it goes on the market after that. We'll see what happens. Yeah, we do have a lot of boxes to check. That's for sure. We're kind of really needy. So in other news, one other thing I'm doing is I designed a table runner for the spring. If you're on Patreon, it's going to be free for you. And I am currently like halfway through making the video tutorial. It's been a long time since I made like just a pre-recorded tutorial. So that's something to be excited about. But I'm halfway through making the video of that. And then I have a couple revisions in the pattern to do. And then it's going to be free for those who are on Patreon. That pattern is going to go in my Etsy shop. It is going to be so pretty. Do you want to see what it looks like? I'm trying to find it. Here we go. Let me show you what this little table runner looks like. Isn't that pretty? Flower pot table runner. I was going to do a Valentine's Day project for y'all. But by the time I get it done, you're going to have like 2 days to get it sewn before Valentine's Day to use it this year. I was like, no, let's take our time. We have some time before spring gets here. Let's do a spring project. And so isn't that pretty? Yes. So keep an eye out for that. I'm working diligently on the video for that. Ella said, you're drinking my nos. Ella, we started buying mine at the commissary because it was way cheaper. Like the price of a can of nos has gone up. I'm like, holy cow. But it's still pretty cheap at the commissary. So that's what I'm working on. Clue number 4. I'm trying to think. Do I want to give anything away? Any hints? Clue number 4, we're not working on the center of this. That's the hint for clue number 4. I'll be uploading the clue for number 4 Friday morning. It's Friday mornings. So keep an eye out for that. And yeah. I'm going to go continue recording this video this afternoon. I'm going to pack this evening. If I get done, I'm going to try to get done so I can come into Vicky's Zoom. Janet, you're making an apron. Yay. I love that apron pattern. I just packed my aprons the other day. Although I haven't worn them in a long time. I kind of forget about them. I should put it where I work so that I don't do that. Because they're really cute and they're really handy. Wow, Derry, you're really busy. That's awesome. Look at you go. Yeah, the Zoom, same place, Creative Crew. Yeah, I appreciate you, Vicky, hosting that for everybody. Y'all just keep in mind the Creative Crew rules do apply. So, you know, all the rules of the Zoom. No politics, none of that kind of stuff. Be nice. Play along with everybody well. Vicky knows. I just don't want it to be a burden for her. Do you know what I'm saying? Because hosting a Zoom with so many people is quite a bit of like work, you know? And so I appreciate that she does that. So y'all just behave, right? I love you. I hope you have so much fun and I hope to be able to join you when we're done cleaning out my closet. Brenda said, what is NOS? NOS is an energy drink. It's the best tasting energy. Like, they should sponsor me or something. It's the best tasting energy drink. Heather said, what extras we may need for clue 4? I will need a stabilizer for this clue. Heather, iron some coffee filters flat and use those. What did we do? Think along the lines of paper piecing. Kind of like clue number 1. Like whatever you used during clue number 1, that's what you're going to need next week. Regina said, quilts are a lot more fun than politics anyway. I know, right? Oh, y'all are welcome. She's going to start it at 7 p.m. New York time, Eastern Standard Time, okay? All right, everybody. I'm off to finish recording this video. I don't think I'll get it done today, but a good portion of it will get done today. I'm out of practice making recorded videos, but it's all coming back to me. And so that's something to look forward to. If you're looking for, I think it's a relatively easy pattern, and it looks way more complicated than what it is. And those are my favorite kinds of projects. In the meantime, I'll be looking out for your pictures. Share your progress, whatever clue you're on. We want to see it over in the Creative Crew. If you haven't joined that yet, it's a free group of really awesome, really giving, kind-hearted, creative people. And you'll find a link for that in the description box. Just to let you know, if you've asked to join the Creative Crew, there's some security questions. It's just a way to sort of like block out the scammers, right? And the people who just want to cause havoc and chaos. If you don't answer those 2 questions, sadly, I can't let you in. So I've had to like deny adding people in because of that, but I feel really protective over this group. So if you don't answer the questions, I have to deny. I don't want to deny you. They're easy questions, but it does cut out a lot of nonsense, right? So if you've asked to join and you're still not in, that's probably why. Go back and try again. If you are inviting your friends to join, just know I'm not going to automatically join them in, and they have to come and answer the questions. Sometimes throughout a day, I'll have several people invite 20 of their friends, and I have to deny all of them because no one ever comes back and answers the questions. And that's why. If you're wondering, that's why. You might not be wondering about it. Okay, everybody, I'm off to go film some more video and to pack some more. I love you so much. Thanks for hanging out with me. Grab this pattern while it's free. And if you're watching this on the replay sometime down the road, next year, 2 years from the road, and you've purchased this pattern, thank you so much. I hope these videos are helpful for you. Bye, everybody. Finding the stream. Here we go. This is something we have to do every week. Bye, everybody. Have a great week.